Okay, we're here for Great British Landscapes to discuss the Open exhibition.
Open exhibition. Never mind the golf. This is a real British Open at the Joe Cornish Gallery, and as the first time we've done this, so it's an inaugural show. We essentially invited entries for it, not really with very high expectations, and with no prize money, because unfortunately it's our inaugural show. So, but it's a competition of sorts because it involved a judging process. Which I chaired with Steve Gosling and Peter Hicks, the painter.
Yes.
And so what you're going to see is the results of that process. And we had over 200 entries, I think 206 entries. And we were originally aiming for around 40 or 50 to hang, Academy style in the gallery. And we've ended up with 75 because we just couldn't have less.
Hard to pick.
It was hard. And because it was open, and a very quick look here, Tim, you can see it was very open in every sense. It was a really interesting photography from all genres. You would expect, I suppose, there to be a majority of landscapes, and so there are, but there's plenty of other things, as we're going to see as we go around. This is the hallway, and sometimes this is where we mount small little internet shows from people who are just starting out, students and photographers who've just sort of begun their showing process, and it makes quite a good space to have work that maybe doesn't fit perfectly with other images in the show.
So what were the criteria you were asking people to submit?
We had a size limitation, which, needless to say, at least 3 people broke. But they only did so marginally, so we still allowed them to compete, so to speak, and that was it. It's a true open in that sense. The Royal Academy do their open painting show. We had some very interesting entries. Some were very witty, some very tongue-in-cheek, some not that great, but overall we were really impressed by the quality. Very variable in terms of print quality, but most of the prints in the show are very good. Some are clearly shop-made, others are homemade, but the overall impression is mixed, and that's what you'd expect.
Were these speculatively entered as prints, or did people submit them as digital files originally?
They submitted them as prints. I mean, we had to keep it simple, and that's what we did. So they were submitted not just as prints, but actually as framed prints.
Yes.
So we asked a lot of them in that sense.
Yes. Let's take another look at it. Try and make sure I don't miss any.
Yeah, that was an unusual one. Well, we felt that was quite funny. The judges enjoyed that sort of rather humorous, deadpan American landscape, Grand Canyon behind, father and son in the foreground.
What you'd expect to see hanging at the Tate, actually.
It probably would be. So, here we are. This is the main house gallery. And we have, of course, the winning entries up in here, or the ones that got specially commended. And as we go around, I'll point those out, and we'll talk a little bit about why they were successful and why the judges chose them. It might be quite nice to start over the fireplace. I hope I can remember all the names of the winners, but forgive me if I can't. I do have a catalogue here now, and one of the first gold awards was given to Pete Leeming for his birches. Maybe a Hodge Close, is it? It just says window on autumn. I think that
it looks like Hodge Close.
Landscape GP participants will know that is in the Lake District, and it's a lovely picture shot on 617 with I think a Fuji with a 105 mil lens, but a lovely image. And Peter Hicks wrote the citation for that, and as a painter he really appreciated it.
Yes.
So unfortunately it's quite tricky hanging Academy style in the gallery. If you've got a picture like that below, you can see it's quite difficult to get these to sit flat. These two either side are by Nigel Ibbotson, both obviously autumnal with larches, so there's a real larch theme going on here. So we have four different photographers, with Pete's here, James Lawrence in the middle, who did a workshop with me, Nigel either side here, and Alex Taylor with this unusual rope cross on the left hand side. And yeah, the judges all really liked that one as well. In fact, we liked all of them. That was the essential criteria. It's quite difficult to come up with our commended.
Did it take quite a while to go through them?
It took all day. So we had all day for 200 and just over 200 pictures, which is demanding.
Yes.
It really literally took us from 9 in the morning till 9:30 in the morning till 5:30 in the evening, and selecting the commended was really enjoyable. But I won't say horse trading because that makes it sound like we're negotiating heavily. But we wanted to get as much unanimity among the judges as possible.
So demonstrating how different people's opinions can be on.
Yeah, and it is. And
pictures.
to be honest, if you had, let's say, I don't know, well, it's just 3 different judges, even one different judge, you would have ended up with a slightly different selection. But with 3 different judges, it could have been quite different.
Yes.
But I do think that from our selection, we ended up with, from the 200, we ended up with a great selection.
Where should we move around to look at
Let's keep going round,
Yeah.
clockwise direction. We've got some very interesting technical approaches. You can see Patrick Kay's Family in the Park at the top, which is fairly radical motion blur, and then Ruth Fairbrother in the middle here with another very soft impressionistic image, a technique that will be familiar to many, but that's a particularly well done example of that, and beautifully printed. And then at the bottom, Very Cool on Sky by Chris Stewart. That's a place that is much loved by landscape photographers, but a very unusual treatment of it, and amazing colours, and I think they're actually fairly naturalistic in spite of the vivid saturation of the blue-green, so turquoise, almost pure turquoise colour. It is difficult. It has been a real challenge for Joe Rose, who curated the exhibition. Hopefully Joe will come in and have a chat with us in a minute, to find ways of hanging such disparate images together, and this group particularly was challenging. There's this lovely sausage fillet image by Andrew Linscott here that really was quite unlike anything else we had in the show, so we had to find things that were kind of tonally compatible, rather than compatible in terms of narrative.
You say a great variation in framing as well.
Yeah, and that also makes it quite tricky.
Sizes and framing.
But this is an interesting set, and I think Ray Mason with his Reflections at the Fisherman's Hut, that was a silver award winner.
That's a wonderful picture, isn't
It's fantastic, so atmospheric. A very simple idea, but beautifully rendered. Andrew Smith here had a lovely image. This didn't quite make an award, but I'm particularly fond of that, and the rhythm in it. And this Infinities, it's called, by David Green, a very, in a way, sort of predictable composition, yet so interestingly done. So I've seen so many images of Saltburn Pier that are made in very nice lighting, whereas this is very dead flat. And yet it's got a great atmosphere to it. If we move around to this wall, predominantly they're monochrome. There is a colour picture top right here by Martin Peters, which is a really spectacular print, and it's just amazing when you see these pictures together to look at the different styles that people bring, different approaches, different post-processing treatments, but above all, different approaches to composition. So I think Martin's picture particularly, is very minimal, and yet it really celebrates the sky, and what an important part of landscape photography that is. These pictures of Whitby by David McGinn were controversial with the judges, I think it's fair to say. Steve particularly liked them. I found them really intriguing, but Peter wasn't so keen, so we had a fair amount of discussion about what worked in them.
What was the objections?
Well, funny enough, Steve really loved the one of Whitby, or as Peter felt that was a bit predictable from his point of view. Whereas Peter loved the picture of the boats, and Steve thought that was a bit predictable. So you had a curious kind of division, and I suppose I was slightly torn between the two. And I feel that they show consistent processing approach, but very different composition approaches. The Boats at Staithes is quite a straightforward composition, and it depends for its success on very simple classic positioning ideas. The idea is all about this sort of angles that the boat's set up.
Very, very classic parts of the composition, aren't they?
I think so, and the very tight framing, and then by contrast, the Whitby picture depends on, I think it's probably stitched
Yes.
and rendered that way, unless it was shot with a Noblex, but that's unusual. So more likely it was stitched, and because of that, it has that sort of rather curved appearance, which I think is effective though.
I think it's very much about the light, the thing that makes it stand out for that. There's a feeling of light within it. That's
there is, yeah.
Possibly a painter wouldn't
maybe
comment on
respond
as
to,
much. Yeah.
But we felt it's quite a high contrast,
Yes.
both high key but also high contrast, because the blacks are quite dense in it and the midtones are relatively few and far between. By contrast, this gold winning picture here of the Dales by Des Heaviside is almost all midtones.
Yeah.
That really excited us enormously. It's got a tremendous mood to it and quite unusual. It's not about fine detail at all. If you scrutinise it closely, it's got quite a soft feel to it, almost as if it might have been shot with a small camera.
Yeah.
But as an example of composition and use of light in a very minimal but very disciplined way, it's tremendously effective.
Reminds me of Faye Godwin, that sort of feeling of light in the sky.
The tonal rendering very much does recall her work, I agree. I mean, sky is very dark and very atmospheric, but it's also very dependent on that shaft of light coming down from the tree, backlighting the barn a little bit. It's quite nice to see the barn still in shadow, and rather than having it sunlit, which is perhaps the more typical way of doing it. But also the way that the wall wraps around and frames the lower half of the composition is brilliant, perfectly done. All the proportions and the relationships seem so nicely resolved, and that picking up that little bit of light on the top of the wall really works a treat, I think.
Do you know if that was black and white or?
Yes, you can see the other monochrome images are quite varied around it, and very different treatments. Quite high contrast for the most part, but this intrigued us. In some ways, it's very deadpan, but it's so precisely seen. Nigel Liversidge again, who did those lovely large pictures up there.
There's still lots of subtle tones in the snow, though, isn't there? It's not.
It is.
It's not just a lithograph type.
It's not. It's not pure white. There is a real life to those whites, and that's important. I love that pool of Cape Barry's, the rock pool. Quite unusual, but the way that the seaweed reflects the kind of cracks in the rock.
Yes.
Very nicely
And
seen.
it continues to shape the pool too.
Exactly.
I came in when I first looked at it. It looked like a pear. It was sitting there.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so that's a very pleasing shape in its own right overall. We won't be able to talk about every picture individually as we go along, but hopefully this might encourage a few folks to come down and have a look at the prints for life, because obviously it makes a difference to see them in real life. This wall features one more of our gold winners. So I think we had all of the individual gold winners in this room here, and Susan Webster's Ella Beck is the third of the three gold winners, and I found that particularly compelling. I know that Johnny, who runs the gallery, has got her eye on it. So
It's beautifully done, the shapes and the rhythms.
Fantastic, and it's one of those that really sort of in the best possible way breaks all the rules in photography. There's nothing in it that's sharp. It's all about energy and flow and motion and emotion too, I think. And the colours are both rich yet subtle. And it's very understated in lots of ways, and yet it has a tremendous power. So, and it's one that I think everybody who's seen it keeps coming back to and being inspired by.
Does she at the bottom too by her as well?
They are. And the fact they're printed small, it suggests that maybe she doesn't think they're quite so successful, but this one's slightly divided opinion. Although Steve and I both particularly like that, but we were unanimous in our admiration for the rather abstract Seascape 7, as it's called down here, with fabulous colours.
Yes.
Which you do see in the waters around these coasts, but it's just the way that it's rendered. It's so clever. I have no idea whether that's done entirely in camera or with some.
I presume so. They just look like long exposures, but
they do for the most part.
They don't have the
and yet they're not entirely predictable.
Yeah, I mean, many of these intentional camera movement photographs can be quite difficult to look at for any point in time because they don't hold any of the detail of the originals. They are abstract in the truest sense of the word, where these are holding quite a lot of the details of the original subject matter.
One feels it's more of a fragment of a second than longer than that. And I'm very, very well judged. We have a few up and over the arch of the room division here. This snows hill of Cape Barriers is actually in the UK. Because when I first saw it, I thought, it must be Provence. But apparently not. It's rather lovely, isn't it?
The second one isn't from the UK.
Definitely not. Patricia Kitten's Ice Cool. Probably shot from a Zodiac in Iceland. Well, maybe it's in Iceland or Yokosuka, but it doesn't say that. So we don't know the story behind it. But it has a lovely natural quality, and it's very much a slightly blue.
I thought it was quite intimate because of the way that the icebergs are structured. You often get the pictures of the icebergs as taken from a distance, as observed, where it's very strong sense of being inside.
Very close, that's right. And I think the composition is very successful with this dark shadow on the left-hand side and the feeling of light coming through. There's a lovely sense of discovery about it. You just come around a corner and seeing these beautiful colours. Very minimal image by Andrew Leary, and by complete contrast, Andrew Smith's Bamborough is a kind of it's a classic subject matter, but it's very, very well done with tremendous energetic sky and a rainbow with a pot of gold at the end of the rainbow and the
icing on the cake.
Castle. So yeah, it's a sort of picture that I think most landscape photographers really love to. Dave Meads.
It's quite a favourite of mine, actually.
Picture is another wonderful image. That is Farndale, and I know as a matter of interest that it's immediately above Dave's house.
Right.
You just can walk out the door.
What a nice view from that
and up
garden.
the hill. And I was talking to him about it yesterday, and he recalls having no specific sense of what he was trying to do with the foreground, but reacting fairly instinctively. And I think when you sort of unpick the composition, you find these little arcs here, and here, and here, and here, and here. And then it's a wonderful cut, and they link so well.
And they carry on to the wall behind.
And that's what sets up the rhythm that makes it such a sort of pleasing composition. And then, of course, the light, cascading into the valley.
It's very low light, isn't it?
It's lovely late summer sunlight. And
I think that's one of the things I liked about it. It's a very relaxed composition. It looks observed rather than
it's not forced in any
forced
way.
composition.
Yeah, beautiful.
And then a remarkable picture below it.
And extraordinary. And I've seen this phenomenon quite a few times.
Whereabouts is it? Do you know where it is?
Yeah, this is the Cleveland Hills. It's actually very near where I live, but it's not my picture. Near Grace Ayton, and it's something that happens typically in the autumn, although not always. Literally, the mist will cascade from Billsdale into the Ingleby Vale here.
Yeah.
And it's rare phenomenon to see it, even rarer to capture it, as well as that.
They do look like great, huge Icelandic waterfalls almost.
And actually, it's quite a difficult picture to make hang together composition because you have this large area of mist, but because there's enough texture and quality in it, it has a beautiful, linked quality. So the very dark foreground and very, very satisfying.
And the very
picture.
A small glimpse of trees halfway up the fog. Sets up that rhythm as well.
I think it's terrific. And then another one from the same photographer, Malcolm Blenky, and it might even have been actually possibly done on the same day, but having said that, I know for a fact that that's shot in the afternoon.
Yes.
Because of the direction of the light, I suspect that's a morning picture. Rising topping by Paul Wright there, a familiar view, a familiar framing, but actually not quite such a familiar framing. It's actually very nicely done with the 617 format.
Almost 624 format, isn't it?
Yeah, it is very, very wide. But I love the patches of light on Rosebery, on the slopes and on the top. And we all enjoyed that a lot. So we'll move through the arch into the second room, and we can see that in this room we have the Portfolio Award winners, as well as another interesting selection of individual pictures. And the portfolio awards we actually had to create on the day for the very simple reason that we had a maximum number of pictures that you could enter for. And most people who entered a smaller number than that. Some did enter for, but only a very small number got all their pictures through.
Yeah.
And in each case, in fact, only 2 people got all 4 through. And we felt that they were so remarkable, and because especially the winning portfolio was so strong, would have featured in the gold commendations.
Yes.
In order not to kind of dilute the effect too much, or basically give it all to one person, that we need to give a special award. So that we had done.
Should we come back to those at the end and go through these first?
Sure. So some interesting and again very varied pictures at the top here. So there's a lovely Hebridean scene, which is from Harris by Janet Burden. Very minimal, very high key. It looks like Shayla Boss, doesn't it? But it actually says Trey Russamol.
Yeah.
I'm not absolutely sure what it is, but it's probably on that same bit of coast. That wonderful shell sand.
And these abstracts are quite wonderful.
Yeah, by Lou Hughes. There's 2 of them. They are, as you say, absolutely wonderful. There's one over here. Very hard to know what they are, though. She has Shipwrecks and Pearls.
Yeah, presuming this one's
from a series.
This is a fiberglass boat.
Yeah, it does look like it, doesn't it? And yet it also could be an ancient ceramic from Rome or something. So, but very well seen, very artistically done.
Between those
is Reflections of Infinity by Neil Hindle, which is a pure abstraction of reflection of the Infinity Bridge in Stockton. So you might not think Stockton's the best place to go and do photography, but it has quite a lot to offer, and that's an amazing structure. This sandbar from Norfolk by Christopher Harrison is probably our most, our most extreme entry in some respects, because it's probably the most heavily photoshopped picture. But it was so painterly and so effective in the way that it had been done, we decided we wanted to include it. And then as we come around here, we can see there's some flowers. A very classical study by Andrew Smith there, called Arc of Columbine. Something rather more radical, Blowing in the Wind. Next to that, by Murray Hill. And then Shine by Diane Schulte here, which is a very low angle. And it's a composition that the idea of which I've seen before, but just very, very energetically done, very effective. And because we do have some witty pictures in this exhibition as well, I think this is perhaps the best example of that. Christine Hadfield, this horse, you can almost hear it going, or whatever they do there. And that's actually beautifully done, in spite of the fact that it depends for its impact mostly on the kind of humour.
Yes.
But when you scrutinise it as a photograph, it's so sharp without being horrible around the mouth, and yet it's got a lovely feeling of light as it softens off back to the eyes and the ears of the horse. Okay, so that brings us rather. In fact, let's quickly look at these 2 here. One by Patrick Kay, Derelict Diamond Mine.
rather fantastic.
Which is really different, really different image. And this zebra at Dawn and Masai Mara, and this is by Andrew Linscott. But they work really well together, partly because it's both, Africa, but they're also very pale and sort of minimal, almost pastel colours, both of these, in spite of being from a sort of an environment that we associate with very strong saturated colours. I love the zebra with the sort of 2 of them facing that way, and then the acacia tree in the background moving in the other direction. So quite wittily done as well. And again, these these are a particular type of crows. These white-breasted crows that look like magpies, but they're not. In Namibia, one facing one way and one the other. And I think anybody who's married will probably recognise the symbolism inherent in that. But it's also the way it's done. Very, very, very calm colours. You can see it's all reflected light.
Yes.
And an unusual treatment, and all the best for it. And then if we look around directly here, you can see the silver portfolio winner, which is Jenny Geeson. 2 pictures are very much from the same genre, and then 2 very different images. And they all work brilliantly individually, but they also have a kind of interesting relationship between one another. We were particularly struck by the idea of the bugs and the VW Beetles. And this lovely ladybird. And these two are very stylized, very heavily stylized photography, and yet extremely well done. You don't immediately look and think, "Oh, I know that process." I don't know what the process is. They have certainly been rendered with a style of some kind, and I don't know what Jenny did with them, but they're very, very effectively done and stunningly printed. The ladybird is, as it were, a more conventional rendering totally, but is very, very nicely seen and wonderful colours.
Yes.
Done too. And then finally the young lad with his sheep looks like he's possibly taking a bug out of its eye.
Yes.
So maybe there is a bug theme with that as well. But that's a lovely composition and very kind of intimate. It's a lovely intimate feel. Quite heavily processed again, so it's a very strongly styled.
It's like a bleach sort of process, I think, isn't it?
Yeah, and there might be a sort of HDR element to it because the shadow details are exceptionally good and the highlights are all held. But they're all wonderful pictures in their own right too. So we just wanted to really acknowledge that with that special award. So there are a few more just here. So
Okay.
look this side, and then we can go on to our gold portfolio winner. Havana, Cuba by Martin Peters again. Martin had that big sky, and that's fantastically atmospheric, very filmic image, and I suspect it was shot with film, but filmic in the sense of the movies as well.
Yeah.
With the narrative, and the motorcycle and the couple, no idea what they're doing, why are there other people there, a thought-provoking image. And then we have quite an eclectic mix below that, another humorous picture here of these photo booths. So it's, as you can see, very varied, not all landscapes. This is another Patrick Case here, a reflection in a concave mirror.
Great colours, almost like 1970s psychedelic design.
It is, yeah. I'm sure Patrick would be very pleased here. Mike Chapman's downtown contrast is almost, well, again, a very different genre, and I see that as a sort of American Stephen Shaw kind of style colour photography. But when you look at it, you find that although it's very kind of unemotional in a way, there's a lot of very pleasing relationships, visual relationships in it, particularly set off by the shadow of the power lines here and the way they connect with the actual power lines there, and the way that they contrast with the little area of pavement.
A strong documentary narrative.
Yes,
going on there.
it has. The emptiness of it is slightly disturbing. Lack of people, and in a different kind of lighting, it might carry quite a threat. I think the fact that it's sunlight and blue sky probably helps to keep it fairly light in mood. And then finally, the Venetian Lagoon Arsenale by Hazel Shaw. We thought again that showed a lot of wit and cleverness. It's instantly recognisable as Venice, and yet there's kind of nothing in it that's obvious. Which
I do like the disconnect. The only thing obvious is floating in the middle of the sky.
The Campanile, I think.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very nicely done. So clearly there's a modern building or something there that she's managed to find to reflect those fragmented images of the lagoon in the background. So, which brings us rather nicely on to the final images here in the show. And we've got Stuart Townsend's bronze winning portfolio commendation on the left, which is another fantastic set of pictures with quite different kind of feelings and moods to them, and yet very consistently printed and strong. Each one has its own kind of quality. But the gold portfolio winner is Ross Brown, and this is Ross's set here. And every single one of these for us was a winner, and yet we're very aware of the fact that these are such quiet pictures that very likely presented in most competitions, I feel they might be overlooked.
Yes.
Because they are not sort of smack you in the face pictures.
No.
And for us it was great, I think, opportunity to be able to say, look, this is a set of images, this demonstrates a coherent vision and an absolute passion and understanding of the subject matter that's then being reflected in the photography with total consistency.
Yeah.
And yet each one is very different and individual, and any one of these would reward hours of enjoyment, looking at it and appreciating it. Each print is very well resolved. There's really nothing that you think, well, wish you'd done it slightly differently.
Extremely well executed pictures.
Brilliantly done, and the taken in camera. I know that Ross shoots at 5.4. Of course, that shouldn't influence my view of them, but it's no surprise to find that, because that understanding and that rigorous approach to composition, I think, is reflected here. It's something we associate with large photography. So unfortunately, I don't think he's coming today, so I can't.
That's a real shame.
Give him a sort of handshake and a.
Well, if we can look at individual pictures for a second, we've got. I don't know the location of that.
Above Rosedale, so North York Moors, at the top left. It's that's one of his older images, and in many ways you could say it's more obviously commercial or accessible,
yes.
And yet still holds up extremely well. And I think you can see that the kind of way he set up the rhythms of patterns in the heather and the way that they're reflected in the dry stone walls and on the slopes of the hill behind really is masterly.
And the balance of light from shade to light is beautifully done there,
and that's lovely, because that always gives it that drawing you out into the landscape using light and a very kind of appropriate and well seen sky as well. And then Hartsop and Brothers Water from Red Screes. So I know Ross is a keen hill walker, and there'll be lots of people who probably have been up there, but
found a great view there.
I very much doubt many people have made such a good picture. And the interesting thing is that this picture is, for me, is probably made in what I call the dead of winter.
Yeah.
That could be February or March. You can see there's the old patch of snow, which doesn't necessarily help the composition, and yet it still works brilliantly because of the light and because of the kind of the understanding I think he's brought to the composition,
yes.
The way that the hills unfold, the relationship of the hills to the rocks in the foreground. And of course there's wonderful lighting, and that certainly makes a big difference without that gold gilded top of the hills, it wouldn't have quite the same atmosphere. So very well done, and yet dependent on lighting. Whereas if we come down to Grasmere Woods, well, actually I was going to say that one appears not to depend on lighting, but of course it does depend on lighting,
Absolutely.
but in a completely different way. When you first look at it, there's a tendency to almost pass it by because it is so quiet.
It initially looks quite flat until you start looking into it.
And then suddenly you realise that it's actually something very, very special indeed. And the depth that it has is actually partly down to the fact that it's ever so slightly misty. Not very misty, but slightly misty. But there's also sunlight coming in here. And that sunlight is just creating little lines of light in here and on some of the branches, and that creates a little contrast, micro contrast and separation that gives a three-dimensional quality to the trees, and that makes it extraordinarily effective. Just finally on that, if you look at the way the colours rendered, very, very naturalistic again, but I'm of the view that he must have slightly desaturated through the background, and that's made it all the more effective. So it's not distracted by colour moving into the background, it's all about light.
I do really like the fact that he's brought in little vignettes. So there's a vignette in the bottom left where the tree's entering through the gap in the leaves.
Yes.
And then as you wander backwards, you can draw into this little vignette in the background with the fallen logs and patches of light. I think towards a little brook in the background, I think.
There's some fantastic sort of pictures within pictures, and you know how difficult it is to organise these chaotic scenes in a satisfactory way. There's lots and lots of overlaps in here, of course, and juxtapositions, and yet, having stood in these kinds of situations with my camera so many times before, I know how difficult it is to you have to accept certain compromises. There are certain things I can imagine Ross thinking, well, that's perhaps tricky, but he's actually got it all to work brilliantly.
Finally,
Dwarftail from Burnsall. perhaps you might say a more conventional landscape picture, but actually when you look at it and you realise that this is a sort of composition that would have most of us scratching our heads as to how to manage it. A lot of green. The green's very kind of dominant.
Yes.
And yet it has tremendous depth with that. The way that we have the rather warm yellow greens here, and they recede beautifully into the blue hills in the distance. As fantastic light, very kind of emotive.
Definitely caught the moment
striking.
of right light there.
Exactly, and that's that sort of sets up the mood. But then you start examining the way that the various elements of the composition reflect and echo one another, and then start looking at the position of the trees if you're into deconstructing images as we are, and notice just how expertly everything's done, how precisely it's all framed, and that sort of we really admire that, but it's all out for a purpose, and that purpose is to make something that's as pleasing and as balanced as possible.
I very much like when I'm looking at photographs and timing a photograph. I look for the time of the transition between the light, between direct sunlight and shade, where you get this diffuse light.
Yeah.
And this picture's got all of them. On the left-hand side we have direct sunlight, and in the hill in the middle distance with the sheep on it, we've got sort of subdued, diffuse light.
Shadow, and in the far distance sunlight again. And there's a richness. There's a kind of emotional depth that's generated by that as well. And I think that's so sensitively seen and composed, and I think that's what can you say? I think it's an absolute masterpiece.
Thank you very much.
So when we started this process, it was pretty empty in here, but now everybody's arrived. So
which is a good thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So come on down, as they say.